Dear colleagues, dear friends, thanks a lot for this. I would like first to express my gratitude to the President of Kúria and István Werbőczy Institute for this invitation. My pleasure is even greater because in my university manual I often refer to Kúria, and this is a perfect opportunity to speak in Kúria partly about Kúria. So I would not like to spare the precious 20 minutes time because I would like to speak about Croatian legal history. That is a very complicated issue. Croatia just recently become a state. It has its own identity, but it has passed through several states and had a very complicated, a very complicated history. So to make it more simple, I would say that the history of judicial independence, its beginning starts with the reforms of 1874 during the administration of the Ban Ivan Mažuranić. The precondition for that was Croatian-Hungarian compromise, which in fact set stable institutional environment that was the frame for the further reforms. The Ban Mažuranić undertook this set of reforms that were intended to strengthen Croatian autonomy through the process of institution building, and the reform of judiciary, its modernization, was one of the most important and key elements in this set of reform. It was supposed to replace archaic, incompetent, and corrupt jurisdiction, as the complaint said at that time. The main instruments for that was the law on judicial power that was actually taken from Austria, that was part of December Constitution and slightly adapted to the Croatian circumstances, that granted separation of judiciary from administration, life appointment of judges, and their immovability, and it was supported by several other laws. The reform started as transition because some of these grants were postponed for 5 years in order that the old judges should be replaced by the new judges educated at the University of Zagreb on the ground of the new institutions. I would say this was a good ground for the beginning. Unfortunately, it did not last for very long. Because already in 10 years, the principle of immovability was first suspended and then abolished up to the end of the monarchy. So the rest of the history was the fight for its reinstallation. It was Ban Kunhedervari who was appointed by Francis Joseph to pacify Croatian political scene that was seen as too much exaggerating in its demand for autonomism, more autonomous position. So under his instruction, the Diet suspended and then abolished the principle of immovability. And a part of that, several other reforms treated judges more like civil servants by the loyalty of obedience and setting the superior control over judges, especially in considering their transfers into the Ban's hands. The change of government after Kunhedervari in 1903 did not help to improve the position of judiciary, but did not make anything in regard to abolishment of principle of immovability. The Croatian opposition sharply criticized these conditions, and it was supported by the Association of the Croatian Judges, founded in 1907 with the help of Austrian Association of Judges, that insisted on the return of judicial independence and especially criticized this problem of transfers and problems of promotions, as well as salaries and the education. There are also even some interesting discussions about creative and active role of judges in this regard. So paradoxically, the first full grants of judicial independence were consisted in the constitution of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Namely, the Croatian regional, in fact, organization of judiciary survived through all the through the time of Yugoslav kingdom, because they kept its own Supreme Court in its own organization, but of course the Constitution was above it. So the Constitution of 1921 granted separation of powers, judicial independence, the tenure, and immovability. It was, as it considers the judicial power, a good constitution. A part of its practice, it was not so good. Because the legislation kind of revised these grants. Judges was also treated as civil servants with oath of loyalty, and a part of that, the country was politically unstable with superior role of king and exposed to the political influence. That turned almost completely opened with King's coup d'etat and octroyed proclamation of Constitution of Yugoslavia in 1931 that granted again judicial independence and tenure of judges, but at the level of Constitution postponed this principle for 5 years. In the meantime, the regime did what it wanted to do. There was even less talk about judicial independence during the Second World War in the so-called independent state of Croatia. That was a totalitarian fascist state with the leader at its head, and as well as in the civil structures of the partisan resistance movement that were based on the principle of unity of powers, revolutionary people courts, and new revolutionary law under full auspices of executive authorities and the Communist Party. This was derived in the institutions and regime of Federal Yugoslavia and Federal Republic of Croatia as part of it, that was based through all the time on unity of powers, and at the beginning on the model of revolutionary justice under Soviet legislation. Split with USSR changed a bit these things because it was complemented with criticism of Soviet dictatorship. And this and consolidation of the Yugoslav state turned the general politics more into strengthening the institution, and they were also complemented with that basic idea of Yugoslav soft socialism, the self-management that implied very intensive decentralization and deconcentration that also helped introduce the elements of market society and general liberalization that made a kind of more liberal ground for working of the institution. But the change of the principal model did not happen. The model of controlled judiciary was still at stake. It was based on unity of powers, the party and state regime, with explicit, by definition, denial of judicial autonomy. Law and judiciary should not have its autonomy from the Marxist point of view. So the judges were treated more, in spite of course, grants of their proclamations of their individual judicial autonomy were more close to civil servants, their position. They were appointed and reappointed for the time, 8 years, by the respective assemblies, and with the precondition, obligatory precondition of so-called moral political suitability, that in fact meant that they should be members of the Communist Party. In spite of that, the judiciary kind of tried to earn its own dignity, especially in civil, in civil sector. Those judges dealing with civil issues that were not so ideologized as the criminal issues. So they found de facto its niche of autonomy in, I would say, a positivistic attitude in adjudication. That is, they find their own autonomous space in becoming legal technicians. The logic was very clear. If we are dealing with legal technicians, we can resist the influence of ideology. That helps on the one side, because in this side you protect your autonomy. The answer to the authorities was, okay, I would like to adjudicate that way, but change the law. I'm applying the law. And not the suspicious interpretations of the law. The other part is that it killed the creative legal mind through this time. The changes of this regime happened just a month or two before the turnover of the power in April 1999, after it was in fact enforced, when the Croatian Diet, Croatian Parliament, abolished moral political suitability, automatic reappointments, and transferred the principal judicial issues into the jurisdiction of the Parliament and not executive bodies. The turnover to a Republic of Croatia and democratic regime bore out the Constitution of Republic of Croatia from December 1990, which, according to all opinions, pretty well grants the judicial autonomy through separation of power, grant of judicial independence and tenure, and constitutionally provided State Judicial Council that is responsible for appointments, dismissal, and disciplinary issues. That the regulation changed, but its structure remained the same. That is, it's 11 members body, out of which are judges elected by the judges itself. Well, a part of that is part of this institutional cover. Reparadigmatization of judiciary in Croatia was not so easy. It had to deal with authoritarian heritage that it inherited, introduction of new political paradigm in the circumstances of the war that opened new challenges and controversies. For example, a part of a constitutional grant of provision of introduction of State Judicial Council, it was formed only in 1994. The years between saw quite controversial moves in judiciary. Whatever comes, the post-war years saw the stabilization, and here, in fact, my title and my paper finishes, but I will add a few outlines on this period. In the meantime, I would say the situation in the Croatian judiciary was improved, I would say, and it quite well, according to most of the opinions, even critical ones, provides institutional grants of independence in regard to influence of politics. So the public perception of Croatian judiciary is that it is not exposed to the influence of politics, but on the other side, the public perception of Croatian judiciary is terrible. I would say not justifiably. I would say that this criticism of media and perception in public does not correspond really to the reality of Croatian judiciary. It certainly is not perfect, but it's not as bad as it's criticized. The new challenges that are opened in this new context is how the judges are using their freedom in this autonomy. But apart of that, I would say that the very important issue is also treatment by the side of the government. Only recently, the president of the Croatian Supreme Court spoke about that in his report in the parliament, criticizing the government because of material conditions of the courts that are pretty poor, of the salaries. The new draft, as far as I heard just the day before I came here, will raise the salaries of the judges, which are pretty low, but the new draft will equalize them, set in the same category with civil servants, which is a little bit humiliating, I would say, but it's just a draft. And to conclude it very quickly, I would say that the development of Croatian judiciary, judicial independence was very complex, that it confronted two different attitudes. It was by no means non-linear and controversial, and shaped the legal culture, which I would say that becomes the most important issue, or at least as important as the institutional regulation is. Thank you.